New Year! Well, 2024 is upon us. I mean, I'm recording this on December 30th, 2023, so I'm not quite there, but I thought I'd post a New Year's pod. It's been a couple weeks since I've posted a podcast. The Myth of Sisyphus finale was the last one with Jamal. And I kind of wanted to go over a few things today to kind of wrap up the year and start the new year afresh, anew. Now, we started off this year, I started off with a podcast titled What is Morality? This is podcast number 71. And in this episode, I went over, I kind of did a little brief history of morality in a sense, at least through the Western lens, going over the Ten Commandments, Hammurabi's Code, Mill, Kant, Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, and really emphasizing Zapp's The Last Messiah, which kind of brings us into, after questioning morality, after questioning what is good and what is evil, and knowing that these things that you can't really know for certain what is good and what is evil, you can only really know what's in your heart. This causes us to question a lot of other things in life. And in Zapp's Last Messiah, he sort of he lays out what happens in that garden, in the Garden of Eden. But before man has consciousness, and when he finally comes to the realization of knowing things, knowing that he's a thing that exists, knowing that he's a person, becoming self-aware, knowing that there's other things around him. And he describes this man who kills a an animal for meat. He hunts an animal, and knowing that he's going to die, knowing that the animal is going to die, knowing that if he doesn't kill the animal, he's going to starve to death, his family's going to starve to death, but also knowing that by killing the animal, he's causing the animal to die. This brings about a moral contradiction for him. Well, I can't kill. I don't want to kill. Killing seems wrong, yet I must to survive. So morality becomes questioned here. Once once we know about the world, once we know of good and evil immediately become disparaging. They contradict each other. There are often good things that can also be seen as evil in another light. So we begin with that. Then following this, I posted my novel on death and God. Now I retitled it The Man Who Killed God, which I think was a mistake, but that's okay. That's okay. Um, but on Death and God, this book was basically, it brought to light a lot of these questions of not knowing what's right or wrong, not knowing the answers in the world, not knowing what to do. But the biggest thing that this book covered was something that we discussed a lot in 2022, 2021, mainly in my episodes with Mina and in my readings of Nietzsche, about the concepts of freedom. And this was discussed a lot in Self-Reliance, freedom and repression. And in the modern society, in the modern day, we are heavily repressed in our feelings and our emotions, uh, not only because of our technology, not only because we're hidden behind screens and we choose to listen to podcasts instead of our friends or call our friends and parents, which is something that I do frequently at work. I'm listening to podcasts 24/7, and then I neglect to, like, why don't I just call a friend? Like, I need to call my friend I haven't heard from in a while. But instead, I listen to a podcast, right? Um, so it's not just because of our technology, but it's also because of the way that our society is structured. Our society is a repressive society that focuses on wealth and success and progress rather than friendship and love and community, right? Very individualistic. So in On Death and God, um, the main question that my protagonist has to ask is life worth more than your will to live? Is your survival, your safety, whether or not you are or are not alive, your fear of death, is that more important than what makes you want to live? And this is a question that I asked myself during the COVID-19 pandemic when we were locked in our houses, when businesses were closed, when we were told we shouldn't be spending time with other people. And I was asking myself, and so was a lot of other people, they were asking, well, yeah, we're safe, right? We're safe. We're protecting other people, but is it really worth it? Is are our lives worth more than our will to live, right? Because staying in our homes and staying away from people, doing all these things, yeah, we're staying safe, but we're also not living. And you're we were living as dead people, locked away in our caskets, our house-sized caskets, right? And in that sense, we weren't really even can you really say that we're protecting life if we're not living as if we're alive anymore? So that was a question that I asked myself a lot. Is life worth more than our will to live? And that's what John, my protagonist, had to ask. And as he went through the deepest, darkest layers of the depths of hell and slayed the gods to save everything that he ever loved, he learned that before, when he was living for the fear of death. He was living for death rather than living for love, living in the moment, living for the people he loves in his life, the people around him. He was living out of fear, not out of love. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that we can make in life. At least in my opinion, I'm obviously no expert in life advice or anything, but as far as philosophy goes, that's one of the biggest philosophical inquiries and insights that I've gained through reading all these books, reading Siddhartha, reading the Buddhist scriptures, reading Nietzsche and Camus, is that you have to live in the moment, because if you're constantly thinking about your death or you're constantly fearing what's to come next, then you're not really living at all. And that's the biggest concept in The Stranger in the Myth of Sisyphus, which we just got finished discussing, really. And because if you don't live in the moment, you're not really living at all. Now, this concept does kind of come under scrutiny when we consider Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being, right? Because in The Unbearable Lightness of Being, Kundera kind of talks about lightness being where we stay away from responsibilities and we live in the moment and we're free and we kind of do whatever, right? It's existential lightness. But at the same time, it feels meaningless. It feels meaningless because there's nothing there's nothing tying us to the ground. There's nothing keeping us down on earth. or as a better terminology, keeping us down to earth, right? If you don't have any responsibilities, no children, no wife, no job, if you don't have these things, if you don't have people to take care of, then in a sense, while you have all this freedom, you don't feel like you have any meaning or value. You feel like you lack value and you don't matter to other people because you're not giving any value to other people, only to yourself. In that sense, it feels very meaningless. Whereas if your being is heavy, if you feel existential heaviness, if you have lots of burdens, you have children, you have responsibilities, a job, places to be, people to see, people to take care of, things tying you to the earth, tying you to this life, your head's not in the clouds, then your life feels more meaningful. Now, that doesn't contradict the myth of Sisyphus, and in fact, it just adds an extra layer to it, right? Because sure, you can be in the moment in both situations if you're free or if you're unfree. And it's important to be in the moment in both situations, but having heaviness, having responsibilities, having things that tie you to the earth, that make you feel like your flesh, feel like your existence matters on this planet. That's important too. That's just as important as being in the moment. And sometimes you do have to look to the future. Sometimes you do have to plan ahead. You have to think about what's going to happen later on so that you can prepare and protect those who you love. So I highly recommend reading The Narrow's Unbearable Lightness of Meaning. Kudos to Dr. Christopher Ryan, host of the Tangentially Speaking podcast, who's mentioned this book many times and who inspired me to read it. So kudos him. Now, sorry, I got cut for a minute. Um, yeah, I didn't post a whole lot this year. The main posting kind of came when I started the Myth of Sisyphus series, but I know we focused a lot on absurdism, lack of meaning, and the random episodes. I did a couple episodes with my buddy Aaron, which he kind of talked about the family unit, the case for the family unit, Orwell's On Politics and English Language, which I like that I put Orwell's On Politics and English Language before the Myth of Sisyphus because it kind of goes into how we use language and how it can become deceiving and how a lot of times language causes us to lose meaning. We lose our grasp on reality. And so I have a corporate job and we have this meeting every day for an hour with this client. And they talk 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 every single day for an hour. There's an hour long meeting every single fucking day, every day, an hour long. And they just talk about all this random stuff. And the thing is, I feel like we're always coming out with more questions than answers because a lot of people think that more talking will lead to more understanding. And and this is kind of funny coming from a podcaster, right? But to the contrary, a lot of times more talking just leads to more questions, more confusion, more unanswered things, more thoughts, more curiosities, and it actually leads to less things being cleared up. And also, if you have more time to talk about stuff, it's you're gonna fill that time with talking because you can always come up with more things to say. So if you set up more time to talk, you're naturally going to talk more, even though you didn't need to, right? And in business, in the world of business, you want to talk less and you want to talk the least amount as possible in order to give the most information that you possibly can, right? Be concise. And But a lot of times with English, we get caught up on things. We get caught up on literalities. We get caught up on metaphors that are supposed to just be left as metaphors, like the Bible, for instance, right? When I was young, growing up, and people would tell me that I'm going to go to hell for being an atheist, yada, yada, yada. I was taking the Bible literally, and also the people who were telling me to convert or to read the Bible or to go to church or whatever, they were also taking it literally. So when they said those things, when they talked about Noah's Ark and they said it all and like, oh, you're gonna go to hell, blah blah blah, and they talked about this being this fiery place, it was like, no, like you're like that's just ridiculous, right? Like no, and like I'm not gonna worship a God that sends me to hell, right? But that's because I was taking it all literally, literal God putting me in a literal hell. Whereas, say, if you take these things in metaphor, you could interpret stuff like that as, oh, God is love. If you walk away from love, you will suffer, right? And that's an idea that's universal in almost every single world religion. If you walk away from love, you will suffer. If you do bad things, you will suffer karma, right? But I was taking it literally, right? So this is also something that I later on brought up in Severance Symbolism and the Self, which if you haven't seen Severance, it's on Apple TV. Go watch it. Amazing TV show. In here, I talked about symbolism and I kind of discussed Nietzsche's uh, on truth and lie in an extra moral sense. I discussed Heraclitus. I went back to politics of English language, Siddhartha, all these things. So as we come up with these, we come up with symbolism, and our words kind of become our identity a lot of times. And it makes sense why so many people are lost in the Western world because we're talking too much, right? We get lost in our symbols, we get lost in our own myths, and then find ourselves in this fake reality, which is something that I also brought up in On Death and God. That's kind of the whole purpose of the book, right? How by fearing death, by imagining all these future terrible scenarios and taking things literally, we get caught up in these fantasies and myths about the world, and we take life way too seriously, and we're led to a place of suffering. We're led to hell. And unless you kill God, quote unquote, which by that I mean, unless you kill your ego, you take away what makes you you, the things controlling you, your myths, your fantasies, the things that you're addicted to, the things that you're idolizing and ideating upon. Unless you take those things away, you're never going to feel love. You're never going to feel the love of God. And by God, I just mean goodness, love, happiness, contentment, enlightenment, as we would say in the East, right? So, and that I was really inspired by Nietzsche's How the Real World Became a Myth, or at last became the myth, or something like that. I think it's either in The Gay Science or Beyond Good and Evil. Highly recommend reading it. Um, so let's see. Yeah, definitely check out Severance. Um, I will say that I had a friend on the podcast, my old roommate this year, who quite coincidentally, um, within the week that I posted that the myth of Sisyphus, absurdity, and suicide, he committed suicide, and it's tough. His whole family was devastated, and it hurt bad. And And I hope that any of you who are struggling with those kinds of thoughts, that you find solace somewhere and happiness. And I think a lot of that, I mean, I've struggled with thoughts of suicide in the past. A lot of that is that I think sometimes we do ideate on the idea of leaving this world, dying and letting all the pain go away. And we idolize that idea. And in a sense, sometimes we strive for it and it becomes an addiction. And I mean, I don't really know what goes on through the mind of someone who commits suicide, but it's tough. And it's a very human thing to wonder about wanting to leave this world. I mean, that's the thing that Zapp's brought up with The Last Messiah, and how everything we do in the world, it seems like it just causes suffering no matter what. Unless we cause suffering, we don't get to live. A lot of times we're causing suffering to ourselves. But the thing is, just as we do cause suffering to the world, we also cause a hell of a lot more joy, or at least you can hope you do. And my buddy definitely brought people so much joy, so much happiness, and he was the happiest guy, and everyone loved him. And I just want to say that I love him and I miss him, and I wish he was still here in this world. And he brought a lot of people a lot of joy and a lot of happiness and a lot of fulfillment and a lot of laughter. And I just wanted to give a shout out to him. I won't mention his name just for privacy reasons. Um, but yeah, um, but I kept going with the podcast, kept going with the myth of Sisyphus, and I thought that maybe the myth of Sisyphus would help other people who are struggling with those same kinds of thoughts. Maybe it would inspire them to say, "Hey, yeah, it feels like all this is folly. It feels like it's all worthless. It feels like it'll all be in vain. Like whatever I do under the sun, it'll be gone." There's this quote in Ecclesiastes, or I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. It's a book in the Bible, Ecclesiastes. I'll be doing a podcast on it here in about a week, with a man named Michael, who I did the book giveaway to. Actually, he's a fan of the podcast, so he suggested doing that, and I reached out to him and said, "Hey, like, why don't we do a podcast?" So, um, but anyways, there's this quote in there where it's people chase the wind. They chase the wind. They do things in vain, right? And we do everything in vain. And what's highlighted in there is, well, yeah, we do a lot of things in vain. So just forget about the end result. You're never going to see the end result. You're not going to see what happens after you die. So just enjoy what you're doing now. Enjoy your labor. Enjoy your wine. Enjoy your bread. Take it all in. Be in the moment. And do those things that my buddy did all the time. He went out in the woods. He went on hikes. He hunted. Hung out with his buddy. Went to concerts. He went out to the bars with his friends. He always, always made me smile. Um, just be a good person, enjoy your life, and live it in the moment. And obviously, I'm trying not. I don't want to sound too preachy. Obviously, I'm just a 25-year-old dude. I still have a lot of learning to do, but that's that's all I have to say on that matter. But anyways, we went through the Myth of Sisyphus series and discussed all these concepts. We discuss absurdity and suicide. Is life worth living, right? The absurd walls we hit in reasoning when we're wondering, well, what does this life mean? And then we hit a wall. We hit a wall where, oh, I can't find it. Like, I can't find the answers, right? We jump to religion, commit philosophical suicide. But then finally, we realize, well, hey, nothing matters. All is in vain, right? I'm just chasing the wind anyways. So why not just enjoy the breeze, right? Why not enjoy the moment? Why not enjoy life? Okay. So that said, that was kind of this year in review. Maybe I should chat about resolutions and when should we let things go? For that, I'm actually gonna pull out my notebook, which I just finished. It was a notebook that I started writing in January of 2021. There comes a moment in life when we realize that we were not going to be able to do everything we want. There simply isn't time for that. Something will always come up, and our plans will change, whether by choice or not. But everything always goes as planned, just not our plan. As a friend once told me, life happens. Day after day, what we want changes. So why not focus on what really matters and let go of the distractions? Let go of your desire to do everything. These are mere earthly attachments. Love goes beyond attachment, so long as it's not confused with control. You know, I think I'm just gonna read some notes. Let's read some notes. The Space Odyssey and the Bloody Thriller both stem from the same place. The mind of the writer, sitting at his desk, wondering, do I write a sci-fi or do I write a horror? Or do I start a food blog, write a poem, play Minecraft? What next? What next? That's the question. There comes a moment in every day after a long silence or a long period of continuous activity when one must ask the dreaded question, what next? And this is Sisyphus, right? This is Sisyphus once he gets to the top of his mountain. What next? For a mind unlimited in its capacity for ideas is equally limited in their capacity to exercise such ideas. Constantly, the mind is flooded with a never-ending stream of suggestions to what's next. But that's the fun part. The bad part is choosing what's next. Choosing one idea kills, shuns, or temporarily neglects the others. And this is a concept brought up in Everywhere or Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I highly recommend you watch that. It's kind of about our choices and what to do. And it's also the main concept in Mind Link Videra is the unbearable lightness of being. Yet, all ideas are sacred, aren't they? If all life was truly sacred, the Buddhist would starve. Likewise, the philosopher lives a life of despair, constantly suffering a great loss, the loss of all possible lives. Sometimes we become attached to the idea that we are something or that we must do something. For instance, since high school, I've had the belief that I want to be a writer. Because of that, writing has always felt like something I must do. It became something I need to practice and continually do, but it isn't. I don't need to be a writer. I don't need to be anything. I'm just attached to the idea, and because of that, I'm enslaved to the idea. I feel guilty if I don't write. I feel incompetent if I don't have anything to write. And maybe I simply don't need to write. The truth is, I'm not a writer. I just like to write, and I want to do it for a living. And maybe writing just isn't what I need to do right now. Perhaps ideas aren't coming to me precisely because I'm supposed to be doing something else right now. I am a man of many hats. I have much that is demanded of me. Okay, this is a little personal. I'll spare you the details on that. All right. Yeah. Okay. And alas, man must slay his dragon, but likewise he must learn to walk away from its corpse. That's interesting. I don't know if I came up with that or if I just wrote down someone else's thing there, but and these are just this is my personal notebook, so you know, um, and last man must slay his dragon, but likewise he must learn to walk away from its corpse. I don't even remember thinking that. And the last man must slay his dragon, but likewise he must learn to walk away from its corpse. Wow. Yeah. Um, that's an interesting concept because you do like when you finish a big task, you got to just let it be finished, right? There's a point like when you're painting something, for instance, there's a point when you have to learn to stop, right? Because you could just keep painting forever. You could keep painting on, you could keep overdoing it with paint, but there's a point where you have to know when the dragon's dead, and you have to know when to walk away, right? Know when it's died, know when it's gone, and you also have to know when to walk away. The flames rise, and we are addicted to its heat, inferno, but the slash of the sword ends it all. What now? Asked the knight. What now? Must he continue slaying dragons even if he's tried and can't find any more to slay? O serpent, feed me your flames. I've let them consume me 1,000 times, and I'll let them 1,000 more. Paint me black with charcoal and boil my blood. I walk the way of water, so not even the sun can rid me of my life. I'm ever changing and wholly adaptable, so strike me again and again. It is no use, for I shall always face you. Your dead body will only mean the death of another. Hmm. Reading this is kind of like reading someone else's stuff because I honestly don't even remember writing most of this stuff. It's interesting, y'all. If you don't have a notebook, thought notebook, I highly recommend getting one and just write down your thoughts and see what kind of weird shit you put on there. Um, lots of fun. Because honestly, when you write stuff down, is it really you writing it? Like, is it really your thought if it kind of just came up in your head? Like, it's not like you create thoughts, they just show up. So when you write something down, it's not really you writing, it's more so it's like you're catching a thought. You're catching it. You're taking a hold of it and putting it on paper, right? And that's what a notebook does. It catches thoughts. It's not you creating a thought and writing it down. It's a thought coming to your head, you observing it, finding it, and writing it down on a piece of paper, right? So, highly recommend it. You never know what you're gonna think of. You might talk about serpents, asking serpents to feed you their flames, right? Move on, says the Buddhist. Attachment forces action. It causes one to go against the current, against the stream. But life goes with the stream, not against it. Life flows down the path of least resistance. And this is not to be confused with what is easy, but rather what is natural. Attachment and desire exist as leaves in a gutter, clogging the flow of rainwater. A to-do list can be infinite, but a man can only do a finite number of things. Yet we attach ourselves to things that may have felt natural at one point, but go against the stream of our life now. I need to do this. I am this. Are those the words of your heart or of your ego? And what is the ego? But our attachment to a past self, our attachment to an image of ourselves in which we just keep on conjuring. Life is not a prison. I am not trapped by anything. I'm not trapped by the suffering in my life, the struggles, or friends, or finances, or family, or my job. I'm trapped. I'm trapped by a God I've propped up inside my head, and that God is me. I've worshiped this God for a long time now, and I've gone to hell because of it. It's not about me or what I think I want. It's not about being great or having superpowers. But there is greatness in being good and power in being powerless. So here I'm talking about the ego as a God that we worship. We worship ourselves, what we want, our own selfish desires. We worship that. A lot of people worship that, and it brings us down. We want to be great. But as again, I've mentioned this guy so many times, Chris Ryan, I once emailed him and asked him a question once, and he told me a really good piece of insight. He said, "Don't be or don't be incredible, be credible. Don't be great, be good." Right? Because there's greatness in being good, power in being powerless. The man who killed God is the man who managed to slay his ego, the ideal version of himself that he created, worshipped, and inevitably became enslaved by. God, in this sense, is the false God of the self, the ego. Today, most people are ruled by their ego. They're ruled by what they believe to be themselves, but it's not. For there is no self. There is no Greg. There is only this experience playing out at my fingertips, beyond my eyes, within my mind, and through my ears. I'm here, not Greg. Greg is a symbol. Here is an experience. Life is experience, not symbols. And so the slayer of God slays symbols to return to life. You'll become like us. And this, I'm quoting Genesis here, the gods talking to Adam and Eve. Or I think they said they'll become like us, or fear that they'll become like us. Does not mean that knowledge turns men into gods, but rather it causes men to believe that they are gods themselves. It is a conception of the ego. In so doing, man leaves grace. He leaves God. He leaves goodness, abandons him. And it is not that man left the garden, but rather he could no longer see it. Blinded by the knowledge of the self, God was invisible, and within him, the garden too. And this garden is used as a metaphor here, right? And whenever I talk about Genesis, I talk about it in a metaphor. I obviously don't actually believe it literally, right? I talk about it in a metaphor, the metaphor of gaining consciousness, becoming conscious of thinking that we know what life is, think that we know what good and evil is, right? And when we get knowledge, we're blinded of the beauty of life a lot of times. Our words blind us of reality. Genesis can be applied to any new human being. We all start off in the garden, but then we learn our name. It is then that our attention goes inward, away from all creation. More or less, what I'm trying to say is just do what feels natural. Don't force anything. Then again, it took forcing myself to come here to write all this. So who knows? Life is confusing. Does this feel right? Am I being a good person? These are the fundamental questions of philosophy. Because you can question your existence, but only action moves you forward through time. Know when it's time to move on. Today, one can go to the Amazon and see okay, so this is actually a thought that I got from the Joe Rogan Experience. It's like basically something that Joe Rogan was saying. Today, one can go, and I know, Joe Rogan. Like, I'm one of the millions of people who listen to Joe Rogan. Okay, all right. Please send your hate mail to the inbox. I'll take it. I'll take it. All right. So today, one can go to the Amazon and see uncontacted tribes, but likewise go to San Francisco and witness the pinnacle of the modern world. Who's to say we can't say the same about people 45,000 years ago? We see a group of unadvanced people, archaeological evidence, and apply that way of life to everyone. We're advanced now. Who should say we weren't in the past, simply lost and forgotten? Oh, that's it, guys. I have one last little page in this notebook that I have to fill out. So maybe I will later. Okay, so as a final order of business for today's episode, I just wanted to mention the concept of resolutions. I've always thought they were dumb, but maybe there needs to be like a ritual to a resolution because a lot of times we make our resolutions when they're drunk at midnight at 12:31. I mean, I don't normally make resolutions. Maybe there needs to be like, go jump in some cold ass water or something. I don't know. But the thing about changing, a lot of times you need to make a drastic change in order for it to work. Because if you make small changes, a lot of times you might just slide right back into the grooves of your old habits, right? But if you make big changes, then it makes it very difficult to go back into those grooves. In a sense, I think that's why the concept of being reborn is so prevalent in so many religions and philosophies. In Christianity, it's obviously a huge main. Well, basically, the main philosophy of Christianity is uh, being reborn, right? We uh, we let go of all of our sins, i.e., we let go of all of our pain, our suffering, our hatred, our anger. We forgive, we let go, and we kill off our old self. We crucify it and we replace it with a new self that's full of love and forgiveness. And the same concept shows up in Buddhism. I mean, that's basically what enlightenment is. It's killing off the old self and forming a new one that's full of love and forgiveness. Uh, is concept everywhere. Right. I mean, this is kind of the main idea of ego death in psychedelics and modern day psychedelic therapy, where people will let go, they'll use psychedelics to let go of past traumas and renew themselves and become reborn in a sense. Right. So if you make a resolution, just know that if you want to change, in every creation there's death. So let go of your bad habit and replace it with a good one. I don't know. I don't have good advice. I'm definitely not an expert in literally anything. I'm just an average guy. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. And without further ado, Happy New Year, everyone. Happy 2024. I'll catch you back probably next week with Ecclesiastes. So that's your episode of note reading, reviews, and ranting. So take it easy, everybody. Happy New Year. Peace out.